Today I'm going to talk about the rise of nationalism and communism from the early 1900s up to World War II. So let's go back to the period of 1911. After the collapse of the Qing dynasty, China really fell into chaos due to its ineffective government. The Republic could not counter the threats posed by warlord uprisings or foreign imperialism. But out of that climate emerged two strong leaders. One is Chiang Kai-shek, and the other is Mao Zedong. Now, they led opposing factions until World War II, and then they temporarily put aside their differences to join forces against the Japanese. But let's take a few steps back and recall 1911. So you remember that the 1911 revolution successfully ended the Qing dynasty, and Sun Yat-sen became president of the Chinese Republic. On the slide it says Sun Yat-sen, but he is also popularly known as Sun Yat-sen, so I'm going to go with that. His ideas for rebuilding China were founded on the three principles of the people: nationalism, democracy, and economic security for all. Initially, Sun Yat-sen and his nationalist revolution succeeded. But China still faced a period of upheavals. There are many problems. So, at some point in 1912, only a year later, Sun Yat-sen stepped down as president, and the powerful general, Yuan Shikai, took over. The new leader tried to rule like an emperor, but wasn't supported by the military. During World War I, the Japanese gave Yuan the 21 demands, seeking to make China a Japanese protectorate. China was too weak to resist, so Yuan gave in to some of the demands. And when Yuan died in 1916, warlords competed for power. So there was a period where characterized by conflicts with various warlords. So we know that after Yuan died, warlords battled for control of China. Foreign powers increased their influence over China. And at the Paris Peace Conference, at the conclusion of World War I, the Allies angered Chinese nationalists by giving Japan control over former German possessions in China. So that land was not returned to China. It was actually given to Japan. Now, students protested the actions of the Allies in May 1919. So this is called the May 4th movement, and it really fostered nationalist sentiments, understandably. So on May 4th, 1919, the students protested Japanese control of colonies in China, and as I said, it's called the May 4th movement. Its supporters aimed to make China stronger through modernization, but other groups looked to the revolutionary ideas of Marx and Lenin for answers. So basically you have one problem and maybe two different solutions to address it. So the protest began with students in Beijing and rapidly spread to other cities. The goal was to strengthen China and end foreign domination. They were done with that, tired of it. The ideals, well, these students rejected both Confucian traditions and Western learning. And the role of women was interesting because women joined the marches and campaigned to end traditional practices such as foot binding, where you would be forced to break your foot so that your feet stay small to live up to some kind of beauty ideal. So, that was the May 4th movement. Now, in 1921, the Chinese Communists had formed their own party. The Soviet Union had trained Chinese students and military officers to be the vanguard of a communist revolution. Remember, they're going through their own revolution at that point, and now Lenin is heading the Soviet Union. A small group of Chinese communists formed their own political party by the 1920s. Meanwhile, Sun Yat-sen had now come back. So remember, he stepped down when UN took over. And Sun Yat-sen is now coming back. He forms the Nationalist Party called the Kuomintang. And at first, the two parties worked together to beat warlords and try to unite China. Because the warlords were really creating a very fractious China, and there needed to be some type of unification. So Sun Yat-sen dies in 1924, and Chiang Kai-shek is now the new head of the Kuomintang Party. And he saw the communists as a threat, but he did ally with them against the warlords, so he maintained that at first. Chiang was a little different, that he did not really promote democracy or communism. But, as I said, he did lead the Kuomintang and the Chinese Communists, so both the Kuomintang Party, the Nationalist Party, and the Chinese Communists on the northern expedition, and they defeated local warlords and captured Beijing. So on this slide you see pictures of Chiang Kai-shek, and then you see Sun Yat-sen sitting down. Sun Yat-sen is now deceased, and on your right you see Mao Zedong as a young revolutionary. So in early 1927, Chiang Kai-shek turned on the communists because he really felt threatened. He felt that they threatened his position. The Kuomintang troops slaughtered thousands of Communist Party members and their supporters, and that massacre marked the beginning of a bitter civil war that lasted for 22 years. Mao Zedong escaped the massacre to emerge as the true leader of the communists. Now, Mao was a young communist revolutionary of peasant origins, and he believed that the communists should seek support from the peasant masses, because the peasant masses equaled strength and numbers. In southeastern China, the communists made a very good strategic move, which was to redistribute land to peasants, and they also promised other reforms, but they're already redistributing the land, so you can imagine that that is a positive sign to the peasants as far as their association with the Communist Party. In response, Chiang Kai-shek of the Kuomintang led his group in a series of extermination campaigns against the communists, thus ramping up. Now, Mao's army begins to retreat, but this actually ends up being another strategic move. Or a move that just worked out auspiciously in a way. It won't seem like this on the surface, though. So basically, Mao's army is retreating, and the Kuomintang is pursuing them on a 6,000-mile long march. So that is a long march. It's almost twice the size of driving across the United States. The Long March lasted from 1934 to 1935, but here's the interesting thing. As Mao and his group is retreating, they're meeting a lot of peasants along the way, and they're treating them very well. And so these peasants are now being educated on communist ideology. They're being treated well, and that in itself is creating, if not recruitment, at least positive feelings for the future. So they capitalized on this retreat by actually making friends everywhere they went. So It still is pretty dire, though, because of 100,000 communists who began the march, only 8,000 survived. And Mao claimed the retreat as a victory, though, because what he said is that it spread the communist message through those 6,000 miles and earned the respect of the peasant masses. So later on, he would be able to recoup the strength of his troops and party. He was in it for the long haul. So, as the nationalists and communists waged civil war, Japan attacked, and Japan captured the northeastern province of Manchuria in 1931. Now remember, Manchuria is a resource-rich area. Japan then attacked again in 1937. And this started the Second Sino-Japanese War. Now again, the Kuomintang was forced to join with the communists to fight the Japanese. The United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union all sent aid to help the Chinese. And until 1945, the Kuomintang, the communists, and the Japanese fought to control China. So the way to think of it is there's a triangulation of forces trying to control China. The Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek. He does force the communists into northern China in 1934. He loses the capital city to the Japanese in 1937 and moves inland to a new capital. The communists under Mao Zedong leave Kuomintang army in 1934 and sets up a base in northern China, but they're just reloading. The Japanese invade Manchuria in 1931 and then attack China in 1937, seizing the nationalist capital. And it was particularly ferocious. During the war, the Kuomintang left Nanjing and retreated to the interior of the country. So, in a very horrific act known as the Rape of Nanjing, or a series of acts, it was about a 6-week period. The Japanese troops captured the city, killed hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians of all ages, and I mean all ages, and brutalized more. So it's estimated that between 20,000 and 80,000 women were sexually assaulted in that. And I was trying to find war photos to show the devastation, and they're honestly too graphic and brutal to include. So there's just this lone surviving baby in one picture who's lucky to be alive, actually. This is a horrible event in history. So, one thing to note, though, is that the Kuomintang and the communists were willing to put things behind them just to end the war with Japan, so they could temporarily unite for that purpose. So just coming up later, and we'll talk about this more at the end of World War II, Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang controlled China's central government. Well, by the end of World War II, they did, okay? So, when we get to World War II, just know that by the end, Kai-shek and the Kuomintang controlled China's central government. But Mao Zedong, the Communist Party, controlled much of northern and central China at that point. And I think we know who ends up being victorious, because before long, the Communists would begin revolution all across China.